Alright, this is our first video lecture in the Baroque, and I'm calling this the new counterpoint, and the term that Monteverdi and his friends used is the seconda practtica. So this picks up a little bit from the things that I talked about in class the last time. The work that Cavalieri and Caccini and Peri started with, these modest little songs set for the stage, that heralded the opera creator, really, the creator of opera as we know it, Claudio Monteverdi. Monteverdi was an experienced madrigal writer. He knew all about polyphony and secular text and text painting from the 16th century. He knew all of those late Renaissance devices, the 5th generation. But he began to question the method that composers were using. Should music depict events so obviously? Should it? Maybe the music should be more about emotion. The actual pitches, not the text, but the music itself should depict emotion rather than events. Let the text carry the narrative, the imagery. The music should be the servant of the text, Monteverdi speculated, the vehicle of what can't be said. If you think about it, we can describe emotion, but the actual emotion itself, that we need something that we just feel, and he thought music would be the perfect vehicle for that. Concurrently, there's an idea that outright music is not very lifelike. For example, you decide to film a TV show about students in high school, and they're going about their day, and all of a sudden they say, I feel a song coming on, and suddenly everybody breaks into a song and dance, like Glee. That's not very, we love it, but it's not very much like normal life, most of us. And so there's that sort of artificiality of music in everyday life. Is that really how we are? Peri and Monteverdi tried to develop a style of writing sung music that is a bridge between the normal speaking that humans do in our ordinary lives and the flat-out singing that we see, say, on a Broadway stage. They're not seeing it on a Broadway stage. That doesn't exist yet. So they develop something that is more like speech but has musical inflection, and that is called the stile recitativo, the recitative style, if you will. This style of speech-like singing takes some time to catch on. It's in contrast to songs and dances. We're going to actually try it out in class to have you listen and sing in recitative. Recitative is unmeasured with metrical rhythms. It looks like on the page, it's printed like regular old rhythms, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes. But I've been in situations where I've watched people try and count the recitative. Hello, how are you today? 1, 2, and 3, and 4. It's not meant to be sung that way. It's meant to be sung in a flowing, ebb and flow way that, like we would speak. The musical rhythms are just there as a vehicle to try and get you approximately the right weight or accent or speed of notes. But recitative is not just also about the flowing speech-like melody. It also includes a harmonic punctuation. There is actual chord structure underneath that recitative helping to push along the cadences of what I'm actually saying, the way my sentence comes to an end, the way I ask a question, the way I declaim an emotion. Those are punctuated by harmonic events underneath. So there's the knowledge that the music is helping to push along those emotions that govern the way we speak. There's also, Peri and Monteverdi identify another problem with sort of music involved with drama. Say you're going to have a play, but you want to have music in it. Do the characters on stage hear the music? Or is the music something that's like what we would call background music, that only the people watching hear the music? There's this sort of double reality. They're dealing with the beginnings of modern drama as we know it, and they're trying to figure out all these things. If this character is singing, do the other characters think, oh, look, they're singing, or do they say, oh, it's just speech? It's sort of like an alternate reality for this little drama. I'm not sure that makes sense, but it makes sense. Here's my example I wrote for myself. For example, you're watching a horror film, and the doorbell rings, and the hapless person who's all alone in the house goes to answer the doorbell, and you say, no, don't open the door. Why would you open the door? Can't you, I always say, can't you hear those fully diminished seventh chords playing in the violins? That should tell you not to open the door. But the character can't hear the musical underlay of the score, and so they open the door and they've had it. So that's now at our end of history, we've worked through these different times when you can hear the music as a character in a movie or a drama, or you can't hear the music as a character. So where I'm going with this, Monteverdi especially becomes sort of the front man for what we call the seconda practtica, what he calls the seconda practtica, the second practice, the way of composition, unlike what he now calls the prima practtica, the 16th century Renaissance stuff. No longer will the music dictate what's going to happen, like writing imitative counterpoints like Palestrina or something, where Kyrie, the actual setting of the text is shaped by musical rhythms. He says now the words are going to be the master of the harmony. The words take charge over the music. The words are not the servant of the harmony. And by harmony, he means all the musical elements. He writes an opera, the important one, actually. He sets L'Orfeo, Orpheus, in 1607. This is a really a big deal. Orpheus is the story of the harpist who falls in love with this woman. He's a famous harpist. In fact, there's a scene that you're going to watch, starting with the aria Vi ricorda o Bosciambrosi, and it's following recitative. In this aria, Orpheus is playing his harp, and everyone's amazed how beautiful it is. He's the kind of harpist that, wow, you'd have to go a long way to top Orpheus. And in the middle of, at the end of his little song that he's demonstrating, look what a great harpist I am, so everybody on stage can hear him playing this music, someone runs onto the stage and says, your wife has just been bitten by a snake and she's dead. And this is the whole point of the opera. Orpheus then goes into the underworld to rescue Eurydice and bring her back. And the deal is he has to bring her back from the underworld. He convinces Pluto to release her, but he has to walk out of the underworld without looking back to see her. And he can't resist. He looks back and sees her, and up, the bargain's broken. She goes back to the underworld, becomes a shadow. I think Orpheus then ends up falling afoul of some sort of crazy religious group, the Maenads, who are devoted to the worship of Bacchus, and I think he gets torn to pieces in a frenzy, their religious frenzy. I think so. That might not be this opera. I can't remember how this opera ends. Anyway, so in the middle of this aria, he's played on stage to entertain his audience. The messenger tells him that Eurydice is dead. She tells him this in the new stile recitativo, or it's also called the stile rappresentativo, the representative style. It's now the actual action. It's not just him singing a song. Here's a song. It's so cool. I'm playing my harp. But now the action of this drama is going forward. This drama through music. That's actually what he called them, drama per musica. So you need to make sure that you listen to that pair, the Vi ricorda and the next recitative. This is just the tip of the opera iceberg. And so I'm going to come back in another lecture to talk about, in fact the next lecture I think, to talk about opera a little bit more specifically. Let me take this idea of the seconda practtica, the new counterpoint, and tell you more about it, because it really is what makes the Baroque style its own. It sets it apart from Renaissance style. And it gives us a good reason to talk about Bach and Handel, which is, I think, a pretty good thing in and of itself. Let me talk now, if the music is the servant of the words, and music is supposed to reflect emotion, this gives rise to a musical philosophy called the Doctrine of Affections. The Doctrine of Affections. This is important. The Doctrine of Affections says that each piece of music should have an immediately discernible, feelable emotion. If the words are about rage, I should feel rage. If the words are about peaceful tranquility, I should feel that. And there are a number of ways that the music can make that happen. It's not just accidental or composers sort of flailing around, I hope I make this sound angry enough. There are ways to do it. You can manipulate the rhythm, you can manipulate the shape of a melody, and this doesn't just have to be vocal music, although it is largely driven by vocal music because there's text. So text is more demonstrative. However, instrumental music, as we will see, can espouse this doctrine of affections as well. Even the key that you perform in, the key of the music, is linked to the doctrine of affections. And this has to do with keyboard instruments and temperament. Am I going to talk about that now? I am not. I will talk about temperament in the next lecture, I think, or 2 lectures later, when I'm talking about keyboard pieces. But the way a keyboard instrument or a fretted stringed instrument like a lute would be tuned will affect the way a key sounds or feels. We're in the modern era. We're used to all the keys sounding the same. You just say, I don't like playing in 5 flats. I don't like playing in 4 sharps, whatever. It doesn't matter. They all sound equally in tune because we use a system of equal temperament. Not so in the Baroque period. And so because different keys have different in-tuneness qualities, it means that F major becomes a very tranquil key of shepherds. But E minor is a tragedy key of sorrow, and D minor and D major are keys of majestic nobility. I said I wouldn't talk about it now, but I just did. But I'll talk more about it later. Doctrine of Affections is something that you can see in any aria of this time period and in many of the instrumental works. You start asking yourself, what's the affect? And I'm saying it that way, A-F-F-E-C-T. It's not effect. That's the normal way to use that as a noun. Affect, in this case, means what's the affection? What's the affect of this aria or this particular movement? One great place to see this takes us right to the end of our time period, but I'm going to do it anyway, looking at Handel, George Frederick Handel, the German composer who is especially popular then in England, becomes sort of the hit of English audiences by the end of his career. His dates, by the way, 1685 to 1759, those are one of the 2 sets of dates for the Baroque period you should just know, the other being Bach. We'll talk about him again later. So Handel is writing in the style of the time period, which is largely influenced by the Italians. It's mostly Italian kinds of things. And he composes an oratorio. You don't know yet really what an oratorio is. It's an unstaged, non-staged work, like an opera, but there's not a tight plot. It's sort of a series of arias and recitatives, and in Handel's case, choruses. That's one of the reasons Handel's Messiah is such a favorite with audiences. Since it was first performed, it's always been in production. People love singing the choruses. Get together and sing. They're hard, but you can sing them. So he composed this oratorio in 21 days. It's a little unusual because it's an oratorio about a New Testament subject. A lot of the oratorios that I'll mention were Old Testament kinds of subjects, about the prophet Elijah, for example, or Israel in Egypt, things like that, about Moses, things. So that these would have been Old Testament subjects, but he writes this oratorio about the coming of Christ as the Messiah, and the whole oratorio is sort of focused towards that. He composed it in just 21 days. As I said, it's been steadily in the active repertoire since its birth. It's never had to be rediscovered. It's been sort of reinterpreted over the centuries, certainly. In this oratorio, one of the things we see Handel doing is a very common Baroque technique of self-borrowing. In other words, he took arias and things he'd written for operas and just changed the text and reorchestrated them. For example, the chorus, "All we like sheep have gone astray," is actually, in its original form, was in Italian, and it was a duet, a love duet between an alto and a tenor. And so that is turned back into a chorus for Messiah. So he's repurposing his own works. We also see composers in this time period, by the way, repurposing other people's works. Like, I'm just going to borrow that theme or that big chunk of work. Bach rewrote several Vivaldi concertos. They were for string orchestra. He rewrote them as organ solo works. Nowadays, we would say, oh, that's plagiarism. You can't do that. Back in this time period, it was a different perspective. This was practical. This was what you did. I like the Baroque guys because it's sort of like a get-it-done kind of attitude, not for the plagiarism necessarily. I'm not advocating that. But the idea that if I don't have an oboe player, there's nothing wrong with taking that part and handing it to a flutist. Or if the tenor doesn't show up, let's figure this out. I'll give it to a soprano. For me, as a practical church musician, it makes me feel like, yeah, this is commonsensical. In Messiah, there are a few there are arias and choruses full of the Doctrine of Affections. For example, the aria, "He Shall Feed His Flock," which, if you haven't heard it, you should stop the tape and click on the link in Cougar View. Stop the tape. I just dated myself. You should stop, hit play, hit stop, and go listen to "He Shall Feed His Flock." This aria is in a slow compound meter. It's in a flat key. Dum, he shall feed his flock like a shepherd. The rhythm is that of a Siciliano, one of those dance types that you're going to, you have a video lecture about, a written lecture about dance to read. It's got a compound meter. It's got dum ta dum dee dum bum bum ba bum bee dum bum. It's meant to evoke sort of rowing on the canals of Venice sort of feel. It's about the Old Testament prediction that the coming Messiah will take care of his people like a shepherd feeds his sheep, takes care of the sheep. Sheep are stupid. They need lots of care. Like, I won't say like college students, but sometimes college students need lots of care, right? Course overrides and things. And sometimes food. And so it's very peaceful, this image of the shepherd gathering them in his arms and saying, "I'll take care of you, little sheep." The music itself supports that sort of peaceful, tranquil mood. Another example of a good affect that's displayed is in the part 1 aria, "For he is like a refiner's fire." This is for a low voice. It's for the bass. "For he is like a refiner's fire." The idea, this is a scary image of the coming Messiah, that he's going to come and sort of separate the pure from the impure. A refiner would be somebody who melts metal and strains out impurities so that you're left with the purest silver or gold or whatever. That's a pretty hot fire. It's kind of a scary process, and how unfortunate if you were a human being that you're going to be sort of skimmed out or left in, melted down, as it were, in this Old Testament image from Isaiah. And so the aria, "For he is like a refiner's fire," it's in, I think, I'm not looking at my score, sorry, it's in E minor, I think. It's got a really vigorous rhythm, unlike the "Feed His Flock" compound rhythm. This is a fast, simple subdivision. Dee da 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 dum da 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 da. And the vocal line itself is actually very instrumental. It's a long melisma. Those of you who have sung Messiah, you've probably thought, what are all these lots of notes? We can't even remember what syllable of text we're on. Fa. That's all in the word fire. Sung better than that, actually, when you're actually trying. This vigorous sort of winnowing or straining out of souls is shown in the way the music is shaped. That's really different from the 16th century sung style. that things had a shape, and now things can be jagged and they can be arpeggiated chords, things that were totally not part of the species counterpoint style, that prima practica style in the Renaissance. So this new practice, the seconda practice, has two important strands. The structure of writing seconda practica. What is it? How do they do it? First of all, the structural building blocks of the new style is that you have an all-important melody and an all-important bass line. A horizontal duet between the lowest, the bass line, which is now including sort of harmonic motion, and we are now in tonal music, and a melody for a higher instrument or voice. What's in the middle? We actually don't necessarily need to write out the harmony parts that are in the middle supporting this horizontal duet. We can leave it to the keyboard player to fill them in the practice of figured bass. I'll talk more about that in another lecture as well. Can I have two melodic voices in a duet and a bass line? Sure. But there's this sort of less important, non-essential, but kind of harmonically essential middle filler stuff, like the fluff in an Oreo. It can be thick or thin, but it's really, I mean, if you think about it, what's the essence of an Oreo? It's one cookie on the top and one cookie on the bottom, and some stuff in the middle. Formless. That is sort of how Baroque music, on the one hand, is structured. And if you think about recitative, that recitative speech-like voice is the melody. It just has no set rhythm. And the punctuation underneath of the harmony is driven by a sort of broken up or start and stop bass line. There is another important sort of structure of the new practice, however, that comes about at the same time, besides this sort of melody and bass line. That is there is another side of this coin of seconda practica, which is an even stricter, tighter, formulaic imitation. Remember in the Renaissance we had polyphonic imitation, 4 voices, 5 voices. Everybody would enter. Remember Josquin's Ave Maria Virgo Serena? I hope you do. That's the whole point of taking this course. In this style, we now have things like fugue. A ricercar is another imitative form that I'm not going to bother to take you through, but a fugue is where one voice enters with the fugue subject, and the second voice then enters with the fugue subject, transposed usually to the dominant, and sometimes the shape of it is changed a little bit, but we can hear it. While that second voice enters, the first voice has a counter subject, something that is a nice duet against the counter subject. A third voice could enter with the subject. The second voice has a counter subject. I need a third hand. And the original first voice can do whatever it wants. If there's a fourth voice or a fifth voice, everyone has the subject in turn in the tonic key or the dominant key. It modulates back and forth each time, and the counter subject goes against it. A fugue, then, that's the exposition of a fugue. Then we get to episodes where we take that fugue subject and we toss it around and break it up. Maybe we augment it and play it twice as slowly. Maybe we diminish it and play it twice as fast. We could invert it and play the same shape, but the interval's going in the opposite direction. Episode, another episode, and we can change to a new key. Another episode, change to a new key. And by the end of the fugue, we're going to hear that original subject back again, presented at least in the bass voice, but usually in several voices for a final kind of wrapping up. Writing a fugue is so structured and so complex. It becomes the hallmark for the next 200 years of a composer who has really learned their craft. Beethoven puts fugues in his symphonies to show that he is really a learned composer. Mahler, Bruckner, not so much Tchaikovsky, Mozart, writes fugues like, oh, no big deal. Of course, it's Mozart. It is no big deal to him. So the great writer of fugues in this period, this seconda practtica, is of course Bach. But Handel writes a perfectly good fugue at the end of Messiah, the end of the final big series of choruses, the one that is blessing and honor, glory and power be unto him, be unto him. That is a fugue subject. And then, so the men sing it, and then the sopranos sing it, and it's imitated in all the voices. It's not an extensive fugue, because it's a little exhausting for singers to sustain, but it certainly has that fugue structure to it. So that is the new counterpoint. I'm going to stop there. I've already talked way too long. You have a fugue to listen to. You can sort of wait, if you wish, to listen to that fugue. It's a Bach organ fugue until you've done the keyboard lecture, where I'm going to talk more about figured bass. I'm going to talk about temperament, and I think that's where we'll stop.